our nation.
It's also important everybody signs in here to make it official. Everyone needs to sign in, but don't leave without signing in. And Austin has
The Republic, the colonists were opposed not just to King George, but also to the British East India Company and the predations of the early corporations, and they fought for the sovereignty of the people. Mr. Nader has been doing so for over 40 years, and it's an honor to have him today.
Thank you. I'm Ralph Nader, an independent candidate for president. I graduated from Harvard Law School up in nearby Cambridge, during which, not in classrooms, but in our extracurricular time, we fought the early fight for the rights of African Americans and Native Americans during those early years in the civil rights struggle. And from there, based on research I did as a third-year student on unsafe automobiles, I produced Unsafe at Any Speed, the book that launched the modern consumer movement in 1965 and led to the motor vehicle and highway safety laws that have saved over 1 million American lives and tens of millions of prevented injuries. From there, we launched many groups spanning the entire spectrum of justice in America. Consumers, workers, communities, minorities, people who are underpaid, overcharged, people who can't afford health care, people who don't get a living wage, people whose taxes are drained by corporations to be recycled in Washington as subsidies, handouts, and giveaways and bailouts to big business, people whose taxes are used without their consent for criminal wars overseas, such as the criminal war in Iraq. We stand here before the Federal Reserve regional office, Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913. It was supposed to be an independent agency, and it has been independent of the people. But it has been a central bank, a government within a government, clothed with the secrecy given it by exemption under the Freedom of Information Act, and is now funded by the banks and controlled by the banks. That is why it is out of control of the American people. And its most recent manifestation, after not enforcing the laws under its jurisdiction against the financial services industry, most prominently under the reign of Chairman Alan Greenspan, the most recent manifestation was that $700 billion blank check bailout of Wall Street crooks, swindlers, and speculators who looted and drained trillions of dollars, literally, from worker pension funds, mutual funds, and the funds of small savers. They did this in order to enrich themselves at the top with massive executive compensation packages that rose to a level of unprecedented greed, to a point where these executives even tanked their own companies, their own brokerage firms, investment companies, and banks, jumped ship into a golden lifeboat, and then had their companies demand that Washington bail them out, demand that socialism save capitalism. The $700 billion was passed without any thorough public hearings, receiving the best ideas and the sentiments of the American people as taxpayers, consumers, and workers who were handed a bill for a corporate crime spree they had nothing to do with and were not responsible for. The Democrats were as complicit as the Republicans in Congress. That Washington had Wall Street over a barrel 3.5 weeks ago. They could have demanded, and they would have received, federal re-regulation of the financial services industry so it never happens again, authority to the shareholders to control the very companies that they own but do not control. And if they're given the authority, they would never have allowed their out-of-control bosses to jeopardize their company and enrich the executives at the top. That wasn't done. Criminal prosecution with adequate resources by the Justice Department to put these crooks in prison where they belong. That wasn't done. Helping homeowners avert foreclosures and defaults. That wasn't part of this $700 billion spending spree on the backs of American taxpayers. And finally, the members of Congress even refused to make the speculators pay for their own bailout. Here in Massachusetts, when you go into a store to buy the necessities of life, you pay a 5% sales tax, don't you? Well, Monday morning, some broker in Wall Street can order and buy $100 million of Exxon derivatives and pay not a cent in sales tax. It's time for a sales tax on speculative purchases and sales on Wall Street, and a 0.1% sales tax on $500 trillion of transactions this year would produce $500 billion, which would make the speculators pay for their own bailout. And do you know that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a stock transaction tax? A stock transaction tax helped pay for the Civil War. There's nothing particularly novel about it, except that it was abolished for Wall Street after World War II. We are leading a movement all over the country to mobilize the American people to demand that when Congress comes back, which is now number 3 in the presidential race, here in Massachusetts, it's an Obama landslide. That means the people of Massachusetts can have a double header. They can get the least of the worst of the two parties in their judgment, because it's a heavily Democratic state. And they can also give us hundreds of thousands of votes as voters of conscience for candidates who have never wavered on their behalf, whether as workers, consumers, taxpayers, or communities fighting for the good life, fighting for the benefits they have been denied, no matter how hard they work. The shift of taxation onto what society likes the least or dislikes the most will lighten the federal tax load on working families. We should tax more not only speculation on Wall Street, which is a huge revenue producer. We should tax more the addictive industries, the gambling industries, corporate crime, and pollution, starting with a carbon tax, before we ever tax honest labor. You tax what you like the least and dislike the most and want to diminish before you tax what you like the most, which is more well-paid jobs in America. By cutting the bloated, wasteful military budget and getting rid of corporate subsidies, we can free hundreds of billions of dollars to be put back in public works, renovation, improvement, and expansion in every community in the country that is begging for help to deal with public facilities in serious disrepair, public transit, drinking water system upgrades, sewage treatment system upgrades, schools, clinics, libraries, bridges, highways, good paying jobs to retard the slide that is now giving us an ever deeper recession with more